Thank you, Niels. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Welcome again to Providence and to Rhode Island. And as I sat there listening to these other panels and thinking about the fact that I was talking about 1790 and they were talking about the beginning of the universe and Mesoamerica, I thought, like, I'm pretty much doing the news here today. So my job here is really to talk about, in many ways, what my compatriots up here are talking about. And those are the things that inspired Providence, the things that he loved, the things that infuse his writings in so many ways. And at the Historical Society, what we're particularly interested in are the ways in which the landscape of Providence, and in particular, the kind of merchant world of the second half of the 18th century and early 19th century, shaped Lovecraft's thinking, what he romanticized, what he fictionalized, but what he drew so much inspiration from. So what my hope is today, through looking at these images, the maps, and the paintings, one, when you go out into Providence later today and tomorrow and over the weekend, you'll see these things on the landscape and understand them. This will pair up nicely with any walking tours or what Donovan Laux is doing while he's here as well. So I hope that you can see in the PowerPoint some of these beautiful images that we still have of the remarkable city of Providence that was so inspirational to Lovecraft. Last night, if any of you attended the opening at the First Baptist Church, you heard Barnaby and Stan mention some things about early Providence. So for very, very quick history, of course, we have one of our founders, Roger Williams, coming here in 1636. He's banished from Massachusetts, a closed-minded and backward place, some would say, that also infuses some other thoughts that we see in Lovecraft. And he is banished and comes to a place that he names Providence. He first stops in what is now East Providence and is informed within a couple of months by a letter that, hint, hint, you're still in Plymouth, get in the canoe and keep going. So he ends up coming a little bit farther away and settling in what he names Providence. But he is by far not the only founder of this colony. In fact, there are 5 founders of the colony of Rhode Island, one of whom is a woman. And this is the only colony founded by a woman. So we're very proud of that here. And it also is why we have 5 capitals in the state of Rhode Island. By the turn of the 18th century, we were down to 2, Newport and Providence. But it wasn't until 1900 that we really have Providence, 1901, that beautiful state house that we have, that Providence becomes our only capital of Rhode Island. So for a little state, we like to make sure everybody got their own little piece of it. But Roger Williams, in many ways, has become, in the 20th century, the identified founder of Rhode Island. And what many people remember him for is this separation of church and state, the idea of religious freedom. And I, of course, was very taken with this, and in celebrating the 350th anniversary of the Charter of Rhode Island, granted us by King Charles II, everyone is talking about this sort of intellectual and philosophical history of what does it mean to have the separation of church and state, and what is this idea of tolerance that the colony of Rhode Island and Providence Plantations is founded on. And I was actually a little more interested in the other effects, the kind of cultural blowback, if you will, of what a document like this could do. And there are a couple other historians, Edmund Morgan and William McLaughlin, who looked into this in different ways, mostly in the 1960s and 70s, and then were long forgotten about. But I think that what they started to unearth is really the key to creating this merchant class that we see in the 18th century. And that is that by creating a colony of complete religious freedom, one of the things that it sets up politically and economically is a system where there's no state church. There's no answering, there's no tithing. And so economically, the contention is that because there is no tithing, people are able to keep the wealth that they make, reinvest in themselves, reinvest in their businesses, and therefore create, in many ways, a proto-capitalist society here. So of course it's 18th century, so pre-wealth of nations, so we're still in a mercantile economy. But that in fact, Rhode Island, and what sets it up as being different, is not just this sort of freedom sense, but also an economic freedom that leads to a mass speculation that, combined with our coastline, means that we are primed to become a merchant superpower, despite the fact that we are the smallest colony in North America. So this is Providence Neck. Have a lot of you been able to get out and explore the Benefit Street area, North and South Main Street? So you feel familiar at all with this? One of the things that New England is probably most famous for are the sort of town squares and the town green, and you imagine the meeting house and everyone sort of gathers around that. And that's exactly what didn't happen in Providence. There's no meeting house at the town center. The beautiful First Baptist Church, that's not built until the middle of the 18th century, and as Stan mentioned, would have horrified Roger Williams. The way that the town is laid out is actually in a thin series of strips. The houses are built mainly on the water, on what is now called South Main Street. And the strips go up the hill. So when you're walking up past the Art Club and you're walking up towards Thayer Street, you're going up towards Brown, each family is getting that strip that goes up the hill. So everyone is facing the water, and Town Street, as it was called. So what becomes immediately important are these waterways and the economic kind of thoroughfares of the water and of the street. People are allowed to farm going up those long strips. But there is no, if you will, sort of that conception of New England, of that town square where everyone's looking in on each other and watching each other. That's not what's happening here in a very physical and ideological way. What's important about Rhode Island and its founding principles is that you are allowed to worship howsoever you choose or not at all. One of the things that William makes very clear, and this puts him in direct contrast to other thinkers of this period and even later, is that he says, in particular, that atheists are welcome. And that's not something that we see. So he calls them, sure, you know, there's infidels. That's a problem. But still, you're welcome here. We're not going to tell you what to think, and that sort of starts flying a flag, if you will, for people from all over the world. And it says to people that we don't care what you believe, we don't care where you're coming from. If you have an idea, you have the will to make it happen, you have a community that what you want to create, come to Rhode Island. And you can do that here, and they do. Even Quakers, who are still being hanged in Massachusetts, are living here in Rhode Island. It takes King Charles II telling Massachusetts to cool it, that they're killing too many people, before Massachusetts ceased to desist. So Rhode Island is really setting itself up as a unique ideological and economic space, and it is highly politicized. Roger Williams is often remembered as that philosophical and religious thinker, but in fact he is trained by one of the top British jurists, Edward Cook. And so civil law and civics are of great importance to him as well. So he wants this community where everyone can think as they wish, but he wants to make sure that there is still order and there is still law. It's just that laws are going to be forever separated from what you believe in terms of your faith. So these early founders come down and they begin getting these strips of lands. And these are like-minded thinkers. They're not all of the same faith. Some of them are similar faiths, but they're like Roger Williams. He called himself and identified himself as a seeker. He was not a Baptist for, as Stan likes to joke, he was a Baptist for about 2 weeks. And then he found something else. And then being an Anabaptist sounded pretty cool, and they had some good ideas. So maybe we'll try that. And by the end of his life, he basically said, the church is my covenant between me and the Lord. I'm a human, and therefore I know that I err. And I know that you do. So how could I ever presume to tell anyone else what they should believe or what they should do? I only know what's right for myself. And these were men and families that believed the same things, that moved down here and started this community, which through the 19th century was still thought to be quite a community of anarchy, if you will. So Providence is this very tiny little community. 1700, there's about 20 families that are living here. But by the Revolution, we have about 4,000 people in Providence alone. But then something great happens for Providence, the Revolution. The Revolution is awesome because Newport gets sacked, just trashed. And Newport is one of the most important cities in colonial America. Not anymore. Providence merchants really seized this moment to make themselves the premier city of Rhode Island. So between the Revolution ending and 1800, Providence goes up to almost 10,000 inhabitants. So it grows exponentially in this time. 1790, this is a beautiful map that we have. You can see a close-up of it in a minute. Really shows us an expansion that's starting to happen between this area, I'm not sure what yes. Between here, which is that South Main Street area, you can see that there are 2 and even down here 3 masted ships and schooners that are able to go almost up to where we are right now. It's in this period in 1790 that we started expanding to this, what is now the west side. But everything that you see outside this hotel, City Hall, all of that, that's in the water, right here. So this is the world of 1790. This is the world that the merchants are making as they build First Baptist Church. They have the old State House. This is a congregational church that no longer stands. And here, if any of you went on our tours, or Lovecraft tours, is the John Brown House. But it really is a walking city and a main thoroughfare that just recently has unearthed this street, Benefit Street, built for the benefit of everyone. It's an old Native American trail that until that period, until about 1757, had been the family burial plots for most of the families that are living on this street. And so these families' bodies were exhumed and then moved to build moved over to what is now North Burial Ground. And they put in Benefit Street over top of it. So the John Brown House, built in 1788, is really the first house up here on the hill. And it's the only house near what's called the college edifice at that time, which is Brown University. This body of water that's downtown is called the Cove. And it's a saltwater cove. This is a tidal estuary. So we are able to get ships up here, but it is tidal. And you can see it right in this, right here. That's the First Baptist Church. That's the college edifice. And this, that it's painted on, is actually the drop curtain for the first theater in Providence, built in 1790. This painting is from 1806. It is about 30 feet long and about 15 feet high, and it hangs at the Aldrich House, which is the Historical Society's headquarters. And it's one of the few views of the growing west side. And the theater is, in fact, right here on the west side, where Grace Church is today. But it still is South Main Street that is really the hub of this city. It is an area that is houses, it's shops, it's houses of worship, it's schools. It really is the center of this whole community. This house is now on Benefit Street, the house that we just this is the Stephen Hopkins house, right? You saw it? It was moved twice up that hill. And so it originally was down on South Main Street, not far from where the park is and where Headway is. So at that point, much of the wealthiest families are living right there on Town Street in beautiful houses, many of which have now been removed. And this is much of what we'll hear about over the weekend, and that is, as we see the expansion of the city, some of these beautiful colonial houses that Lovecraft is so woeful of their removal, they are trying to save some of them and moving them up the hills. And here we can just take a closer look again at things you can still see. First Baptist Church, where we kicked things off last night. The college edifice, which is University Hall, Brown. And the old State House over here. So you can see over here, Weybosset Neck. So we're right in this area over here. And you can see that the families, John Brown's original house in this area, are able to have 2 and 3 masted ships come right up to the wharves at the back of their houses. If it were 1790 and you were a 16-year-old young man, you were living in Worcester, Massachusetts, almost everything that you would need from the birth to your death would be within a 12-mile radius of your home. Where you would work, who you would marry, where your children would live, where you would die, will happen and can happen in about a 12-mile radius. When you're living in a port city like Providence, Newport, Bristol, Boston, and you're in the exact same time period, 16-year-old boy, 1790. You know that on any day, You can walk to the dock, you can get on a ship, and in 3 months, you can be on the coast of Africa. Half a year, you can be in China, you can be in Batavia, you can be anywhere around the world. And this leads to an incredible cosmopolitan sense of these city centers that really informs the way Providence sees itself in this New Republic period. If you were living in Providence, you were just as likely to be trading Spanish money for French, for English coin. You were just as likely to hear Arabic or Spanish or French being spoken at your coffee exchange or at a tavern. This is where you would see and have your first experience of different spices and oranges. There are accounts of people sitting in a tavern on South Main Street talking to a man with a parrot on one shoulder and a monkey in his lap. This is not Worcester. This is a world of endless possibilities, and it is one of great romance and great opportunity. The Atlantic world is really where Providence had been focused for a very long time. Much of the wealth amassed by the families, the merchant families, was based around a thing called the West Indies trade, or the provisioning trade. In the West Indies, they had basically stable crop economies. They were growing one thing. Let's say it's sugar. That was a pretty popular one at the period. They were clear-cutting forests of mahogany, and they were planting plantation after plantation. They weren't growing food, they weren't fishing, they weren't growing livestock, they weren't raising horses, but they needed all of those things. They got those things from Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Massachusetts, and that's why they called us the grocery colonies. We provided them with all of the things that they needed to have the ultimate slave economy without ever diversifying what they did. Without the support of the grocery colonies, slave colonies fall apart. The Browns, in particular, make a fortune off of the West Indies trade. They also are moving into South America, and the Dutch colony of Suriname is actually a country basically made by Rhode Island. Rhode Island had this little problem about not paying attention to where Britain told them they were supposed to be trading, and so the Dutch colonies, in fact, from the 1700s and 1600s on, we have our first letter from Queen Mary in 1654 telling Rhode Islanders to leave the Dutch alone and that they were only supposed to be trading with the English at that point. So we keep trading with the Dutch, and this is one of my favorite paintings called Sea Captains Carousing in Suriname. So this is sort of the what happens in Suriname stays in Suriname moment. So they're down there and they find out this one night, they realize that all of these guys are from Rhode Island, and they're all in Suriname at the same time. Go figure. So they're all down there, and they commission John Greenwood to paint a picture of all of them to remember this great moment. And it is funny and a bit satirical. You can see these great men. One's vomiting in this guy's pocket. There's a guy urinating in the corner. There's another guy, yeah, he's vomiting over here as well. They're playing cards. They have slaves serving them. This is just good times in Suriname all around. What's interesting is that 12 of these sea captains have been identified. 10 of them are members of the original corporation of Brown University. And there are 3 governors in that painting alone. So everything, politics, economy, everything is wrapped together in this. And the West Indies trade is where the money is in this period. So this is the 1750s. The Brown family begins to diversify. They're not content with just bringing things in from other areas in their farms. They start manufacturing things as well. And one of the things the Brown brothers do better than anybody else is make spermaceti candles. So they're getting the whales, the head matter of these whales from Nantucket. They're bringing them in, and they're creating these spermaceti candles, and they're trading them all over the West Indies, in England, in Africa, all over. So spermaceti candles are big for the Browns. They're also getting involved in the transatlantic slave trade. 1737 is the first slave trading voyage. Now in the 20th century, when Rhode Island stops talking about its involvement in the slave trade, because, you know, we were abolitionists, we didn't do stuff like that. You'll find comments about it in Lovecraft's writing. You'll find him talking about the wars where the slaves are brought in, while academics are ignoring it and painting New England as this wonderful bastion of virtue. you have writers who are remembering, and Lovecraft who's remembering, what was actually going on at these wars. 12 million men, women, and children are brought into New World slavery. Only 500,000 are brought to North America. 4 million are taken to Brazil alone. Of those 500,000, much of what North America gets are women. And that's really important because that means we set up a system of self-perpetuating slavery in North America that other countries can't do. Of those slaves, 100,000 were brought to the New World on Rhode Island ships. And that might not sound like much. We're overwhelmed by Portugal, England, France, everywhere else in Europe that's been doing this a lot longer than we have. But if you think about it, Rhode Island is the smallest colony. But let's say it's 1764 and you're on the west coast of Africa, and there's a North American ship there trading. You're in North America, there's a 60% chance that that ship is from Rhode Island. Rhode Island is the leading slave trading colony in North America. And all of these families that he writes about, those families that participate in the burning of the Gaspee, those men that gather in secret to disrupt the British Empire, they're some of the most prolific slave traders in Rhode Island's history. So just a complicating factor of what these guys really were and what it means when rampant speculation is allowed to happen economically. There's some good things that happen and some really bad ones. So these are just some of the wonderful records that they have in places like the John Carter Brown Library of these voyages that detail every man, woman, and child put aboard these ships. And these are the famed Brown brothers. So there are 4 Brown brothers, John, Joseph, Nicholas, and Moses. But the 2 that get the most press are John, whose house we have, and Moses. John, or as I like to call him, Mr. Bean, is the one who becomes the wealthiest of the brothers in that period. He's the one who participates in the slave trade. He becomes the most vocal advocate of the slave trade. Moses, on the other hand, is so disgusted by what he sees in the slave trade and his participation that he not only becomes a Quaker, but he becomes the person who writes the law banning the slave trade from Rhode Island, and he becomes a founding member of the Providence Abolition Society. So these were, you can imagine, like great family dinners at this point. But they weren't content to stay in the Atlantic, and where the real money came from in the late part of the 18th century and the beginning of the 19th century is the Pacific. 1787, John Brown sends the first ship to China from Rhode Island. They're not sure what China wants at this point. You know, Africa's a tested market. England, they know. The West Indies, done. What in the world does China want? So they load the ship up with everything they send to these other places. Pork, candles. Guess what China doesn't need? So China's like, you know, we got enough candles. We're pretty good with the fire thing. Got a lot of pigs too. We're all set. And so the first couple voyages don't go so well. One family member ends up selling in India. That doesn't go over well either. He sells the whole ship, mind you. In a few years, within about a decade, it's really John Brown's cousins and nephews who start getting it right. And they realize, what is the number one thing that China wants from North America? I mean, North America wants from China what everybody wants. Right? North America, these are some of the areas where they would be docking. North America wants export wear. They want China. We want silks. We want cashmeres. We want teas. We want spices. Now, Rhode Island's always been a coffee city, but we're still importing a lot of tea. We're trading it to other places. We want opium. And that's what everybody wants. But what do they want from us? It turns out that they want what they've already used up. They want ginseng. They've exhausted the Chinese supply of ginseng, and they need to get it from somewhere. And it turns out that North America is one of the only other places that it grows well. When Rhode Island figures out the ginseng bit, then we're in. And these families, like the Browns and the Ives, begin to amass incredible fortunes. Hundreds of thousands of dollars on every voyage. John Brown dies in 1803, and it's just the beginning of the fortunes that these families would amass. So they begin shaping this Providence. John Brown decides, in the 1790s that he's going to make this even bigger, that he's going to take what he's doing even broader. And his family, his brother says, we think our brother is basically out of his mind. He doesn't apprehend the smallness of this place and what's possible. And John Brown basically turns around and says, I do apprehend the smallness of this place, so I'm going to make it bigger. And he knocks down the cliffs, and he knocks down the hills, and he fills in the part of the cove, and he fills in what's next to Fox Point, and he builds India Point. India Point so named for the China trade. So he makes Providence the bigger place that he needs it to be. And it's his nephews, the next generation, that take advantage of that and start to build this beautiful city that we're seeing here from across the cove. It built the gorgeous houses that we have, that are filled with the mahogany that was cut down in those plants to build those plantations in South America and the islands. And it began the conversations when they started talking about what could we do that wasn't part of the slave trade to build things like industry. Because Rhode Island was uniquely situated in terms of its waterways. And those families that amassed the fortune in the China trade invested their money in building things like Slater Mill and then Lonsdale, and they became the industrial magnates of the 19th century. So that document of 1663 that allows for this kind of economic speculation leads to this world that the merchants made that created an industrial powerhouse that by 1900 makes Rhode Island the wealthiest state in the country. And it's at that moment that we build the absolutely beautiful state house that you see when you're here in downtown Providence. And all of these buildings and landscapes and wharves and docks were what Lovecraft saw that inspired him to write about this great and beautiful place called Providence. So thank you very much. Well, he bought up the land.
Oh, okay, so he bought up all.
Right, so he's a pretty massive landowner at this point. And so he's bought up a lot of the land, he's leveling it, and it's why you'll see some strange things, like you'll see a little kind of plaque and monument for where Roger Williams landed, and it's, you know, in the middle of a park, like blocks and blocks and blocks away from the water, and that's why.
Okay.
And so he wasn't just dragging it more and more. But so John Brown buys up a lot of these areas. His brother Moses ends up, he built his country estate all the way down to the river. Moses Brown's land is what's now Swan Point Cemetery. And they build the bridge over the river, that they make a toll bridge, and they control and get the profits from that. This is a family that knows how to do very well with their natural resources and making everybody else pay for them. Yep.
Is that painting of the sea captains by John Grefe, is that available on display somewhere?
It is unfortunately located in St. Louis, Missouri. It went up for auction about 15 years ago, and St. Louis won. We don't know why, but I mean, we know why, they had more money, but we don't know why they wanted it so badly. But it is a great painting, and when Brown's Slavery and Justice Committee was created, that's when they started trying to identify all of the different people in it, and were able to locate them and put names to them. For all of the people who were saying, you know, no, our founders again were ardent abolitionists who really believed in freedom and all of that, they said, but they were all doing really well in Suriname. So, not just a vacation spot. Thank you. Oh, yep.
Can you tell us about the rum trade?
The rum trade, sure. So many people have heard of the triangle trade. So Rhode Island, as they're trading in the West Indies in particular, we're bringing all of that stuff down to those colonies, and we're trading it for things like mahogany, but we're also trading it in large part for molasses. So we're bringing that molasses back to Rhode Island. We have about 41 rum distilleries in this period in Rhode Island, most of them in Newport. In fact, Moses Brown, many stories about him as a child, they used to call him like Molasses Mo, because he used to go down, they said he was the molasses taster for the family. So we're bringing in a lot of molasses, turning it into very strong rum, and then we're trading that frequently on the west coast of Africa. So we're trading that for slaves, and then we are then taking those slaves to the West Indies, and then to the American South. Very few are coming back here, but it's important to note in that 1790 period and periods of slavery, Rhode Island's population of people of African descent is about 13%. We compete with Connecticut for the highest percentage of enslaved people in New England. So it is a significant part of our population, and that percentage declines through the 18th and then 19th century. The number doesn't decline, but the percentage does. But so the rum men is frequently what Rhode Island traders are called. And that's because that's what they're bringing most frequently. And you'll see many of the things that we are known for exporting from up in North America are highly addictive. It's a good plan, you know.